What's going on, guys? It is Tyler.
And it's Aaliyah with 10 Below.
And it's a show where we tell you about history, PolitiFacts, anything in 10 minutes or less.
That's not quite exactly what we do here, but we'll take it.
It's close enough.
It's close enough.
I was improvising.
He was improvising. All right. Well, today we are going to unpack the concept of the disparity between poor whites and blacks. So, a lot of the times we think of poor whites as being racist. There are stereotypes of black people being thugs. Where did all of this animosity come from? It's clearly there. Well, let's go back. We've definitely got to take a look back in history to realize where we are today. So, you might have heard of Bacon's Rebellion if you've taken a history class, but if not, I will explain it to you. It is basically a time whenever poor white people were indentured servants, and they worked together with black slaves. And what they did was they decided to overthrow the system, but it unfortunately did not work. So in order for the elite to keep this from ever happening, they wanted to separate poor whites and blacks so that they never worked together again. They would never be, there's strength in numbers. They'd never reach those numbers again. So what they did was they gave poor whites a little bit more privilege than the slaves. They allowed them to whip the slaves. They allowed them to come inside. They allowed them to be, just have a little bit more sense of control. If you've heard of Stanford's prison experiment, you know what happens next. In Stanford's prison experiment, people were told to act like security guards. Regular people were told to act like security guards. Regular people were told to be criminals. And it was pretty soon where the guards, fake guards, started acting like real guards, where the sense of authority went to their heads. Same thing happened with poor whites. The authority went to their heads, and they started thinking that black people deserved the treatment that they got, and that the poor whites were superior to the blacks. The black people were animals, and things like that, and it prevented them from working together because now black people hated poor white people, and poor white people hated black people, instead of them both hating the person who was putting them both through hell. So that is kind of the history of they were once friends. Well, not friends, but once allies, to where now they hate each other more than anything. So what are your thoughts, Tyler? What are your thoughts about the animosity between the two groups? Do you think that they should work together? They have more similarities than differences? Or what do you think?
It's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah, it's too late. The cut is too deep. Because unless the kids of that generation come out and be like, you know what, I'm not going to be racist anymore. Yeah, I don't know. It's already done. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Do you feel like, and this is just kind of like an interpretation question, no right or wrong answer. Feel comfortable to say what you feel, even though it might get you roasted. But do you think that we should have more empathy towards poor white people, or do you think they've kind of made their bed and now they've got to lay in it?
I feel like the new generation needs to step up, because it's hard for me to say the older generation, like 70-year-old grandpa. I used to call black people the N-word when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because it's like they grew up in it, but now it's like we have the internet, and you have a choice to be racist or not at this point. You can educate yourself and be like, you know what? I see white privilege. I can see how, even if I'm not being blatantly racist, how I could be racist in other ways.
Yeah.
You have the opportunity to change that. So I don't have very much sympathy for the younger generation as much as it's hard to say I have sympathy for the older generation because they were blatantly racist and super bad, but they grew up during that time. Mm-hmm. So it's like I have more sympathy for them because they didn't have the resources other than their dad telling them black people were less than them.
I think that mainly there's a focus here towards poor white people. You have more in common with black people than you think you do. We've created an us versus them mentality where, it's easy to be racist because it keeps you from having to take a sort of responsibility or keeps you from seeing yourself in that light. Like, oh, well, at least I'm not him. You know what I mean? So, but I think that the unfortunate reality, not the unfortunate reality, but I guess unfortunate to you, But the real reality is that you have more in common with black people than you do with the white elite at all.
100%.
And pointing to people beneath you doesn't make you get any higher on the totem pole.
Nope.
I think that it's important, Shays' rebellion, or Bacon's rebellion, was so important because it showed that two groups facing problems could work together and advocate for change, And the same thing could happen now if we stopped blaming black people, illegal immigrants, Hispanics, Jewish people, for problems in the country. I feel like it opens the ability for you to realize the real problems aren't the people beneath you. Your enemy aren't the people struggling to survive. The people against you are the ones who are making a profit, a huge profit, after you work day in, day out, from sun up to sundown.
40 hours a week to make
more.
1,600.
Yeah, more, where you're still living in poverty. Your enemy isn't Juan, who's also doing the same thing.
Juan's probably doing a better job than you.
Your enemy isn't Juan. Your enemy is the person who's exploiting your labor. It's the person who has never worked at the place that you're working, and they're making millions off of what you're doing. That is somebody that you should talk with. Instead of wondering, instead of blaming poor people for being poor, maybe we should start looking at the people who are exploiting our labor in terms of saying, hey, I deserve a higher wage. It really shows the importance of realizing who your true enemy is. Back then, poor whites knew who their enemy was. It was the oppressor.
Mm-hmm. But that's how deep this system is.
It'll
system
do that. Yeah.
has played. I hate to be pessimistic here, but to people listening to this is going to be pessimistic, but to me it's realistic. I think it's natural human behavior to try to be better than someone else. And the government used that against poor white people to make them feel slightly better than black people, like you said, so then they could not have the numbers to overthrow the government.
Yeah.
They used our natural behavior against us.
Yeah.
And it's crappy.
And it worked. And now we're stuck in this place where
Where
blacks and poor whites are so busy fighting, calling each other names, blah, 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 that we're missing the entire big picture. There is a puppet master at the beginning, at the very top of this, and he's just relaxed because we're so busy fighting each other that we don't even come for his throne at all. It's the same thing. So what, Bacon's rebellion happened back in 1708, or so, in the 1700s, who knows, in the 1700s, and it's 2020, and we're still so busy fighting each other that we are leaving systematic racism untouched, systematic classism untouched, So it's something worth considering, guys. It's something that nobody talks about. Nobody knows the history of poor whites and blacks in this country because they don't want you to know, right? They don't. And so I hope that if you're listening to this, you can take something away from it, and the fact of, hey, that's a good point. Maybe we should work together. Now, then again, I would never encourage black people to have to come together with racists. I don't think that they should be subjected to that sort of emotional torment. I know personally, for me as a black woman, it is really hard seeing my news feed sometimes because there's a lot of racist stuff on there. It really bothers me. So, again, for the sake, or for the mental health of black people, I don't think that you should have to come together with racists. But this should be an eye-opener to racist that, again, you have more in common with the black community than you do with the community that you want to be a part of.
And you'll never be a part of because the system
is very rare
against you. But, this has been 10 Below with Tyler and Aaliyah. We're exposing the system one podcast at a time.
Maybe that's what the podcast should be called. Exposing the system.
Boom.
That's not bad, actually.
We're changing it.
I know, just mid-podcast. That's what it is, exposing the system. All right, so anywho, he said it best. Aaliyah and Tyler, we will see you guys next episode where we come up with another topic that's controversial, but we hope that you listen anyway.